What happens when you witness an 84-year-old man struck down before a bar and not a single soul in the crowd speaks up? Not one protest, not one hand offered to help, only averted eyes and laughter echoing through thick glass. Some may think him just a lonely old man with nobody on his side. But 30 minutes later, when the growl of engines rose from down the street and a military convoy rolled into view, every gaze shifted. No one understood what was happening. No one imagined that this moment would transform an entire community. And if you think this is merely a story about a slap, you might want to listen through to the very end. Harold Hank McCoy, 84, is the living embodiment of a bygone era that has never truly faded. A former Marine Corps engineer, he served 3 tours, was wounded once, and has spent nearly half a century since the war in a city that barely remembers men like him. Every Saturday afternoon, Hank walks to the little diner called Clayton's Grill, as though it were a ritual. Not once has he missed it. He needs no reminder, no companion. He chooses the small table against the wall, where no one asks questions, where he can watch the world without being noticed. All he requires is a hot cup of coffee, a simple cold-cut sandwich, and a moment of quiet. For 12 years, nothing has changed. His olive green jacket is faded, his leather shoes cracked at the heel, his hickory cane accompanies each step. Every detail of his appearance tells a story, yet he never shares. Hank does not speak much, not because he is closed off, but because he knows few truly listen. The city has grown used to his silence as part of the scenery, like a street lamp or an old sign, present but unremarked. He never mentions the war, never recounts the burning sands beneath his boots, the sleepless nights lit by flares, or the scent of engine oil mingled with dried blood. He never speaks of the scar on his shoulder, an ache that nurses warned would pain him every cold season. He certainly never names the comrade who fell beside him without a chance to call his name. For Hank, these things are not conversation pieces. They are burdens he must carry, always. He writes postcards to his grandson, now a cadet at West Point, each time he visits the diner. The messages are ordinary, greetings, a few words of encouragement. Yet his hand trembles slightly as he writes, not from age, but because each phrase carries all he cannot say aloud, things an old soldier can only pass on in silence. Hank seeks no attention. He wears no medals, no veteran's cap, never drops the name of his old unit. He needs no one's thanks. What he needs is a place to be, a steady breath amid the rush of life. A passing glance will do, as a reminder that he still stands. So every Saturday he reappears as an unseen pillar. When the server brings his coffee without taking an order, no one thinks it special, but to Hank, it is silent acknowledgement. He raises his cup in a nod of gratitude, lifting a vessel that holds more warmth than its steaming contents. Each sip washes away a week's worth of unspoken memories. He sits upright, never stooping like many men his age. His posture is a habit from the corps, and a reminder he remains steady, unbowed. Though life holds no trenches now, every day is still a battlefield, and Hank, as always, holds his ground, silent, yet unyielding. When he stands to leave, he folds his postcard neatly, tucks it into his jacket pocket, guarding a piece of his heart where no one sees. Cane in one hand, he walks away, unhurried but certain, eyes not meeting anyone, yet seeing everything. He departs in silence. But for those with eyes to notice, he leaves behind an indelible presence. The city changes, people rush by under neon lights, car horns blare. Yet Hank remains the same, a worn but enduring part of this place. as if he were not merely a resident, but the keeper of its memory, the guardian of a dignity time has yet to erase. All right, dear viewers, if this story moved you, please leave a like and hit subscribe, only if you truly felt what I shared. On his way home from Clayton's Grill, Hank turned down a familiar side street, where every sound had become a backdrop to his slow footsteps. He hadn't noticed the biker gang gathered outside the rusty tap bar until the edge of his coat brushed against the handlebar of a sleek motorcycle. So slight a contact no one else would have noticed. The bike didn't topple. No scratch marked its paint. No alarms rang out. Yet in the world of young egos, every slight is an excuse. Hank stopped instantly, not from habit, but by reflex. An old Marine never ignores what he's touched. He turned, meeting the gaze of a young man striding toward him, eyes blazing with offense at an unseen insult. Hank raised a hand and offered a small, polite smile, not to placate, but as he had learned to do in his uniformed days. Yet that humility, that gentleness, went unreturned. The young man spoke no words, needed none. He simply swung his hand and struck Hank's face with such force that even onlookers froze in disbelief. The blow did more than jar the old man's weathered features. It shattered the thin barrier between him and a world growing ever more indifferent. Hank fell, not from the strength of the blow, but from surprise, from age, and from a nameless pain washing over him like ice-cold water. One hand still clutched his paper bag, instincts refusing to let go. Inside lay his sandwich and his postcard, the two treasures of his brief afternoon pilgrimage. They tumbled to the ground, the wrapper unfolding, the sandwich rolling gently into a slick patch of motor oil. No one in the bar stirred. A few eyes turned away. A few chairs pivoted elsewhere, and merciless laughter rang out through the thick glass, as if the old man's fall had never occurred. Hank did not cry out. He did not glare. He did not press a hand to his cheek. He simply leaned on his cane and rose with deliberation. His silence was greater than the stunned hush around him. As he bent to pick up the scattered sandwich, his knee quivered, each movement unfolding in a private realm where dignity is tested not by enemies, but by the world's indifference. He gathered each fallen bit of bread, his aged hands moving slowly as if those crumbs were the last remnants he could claim. The wrapper was torn, smeared with oil, but Hank gently placed the sandwich back into the bag, carefully, reverently, as if the gift still held its worth. A soldier who once carried a comrade through battle, now stooping to retrieve the fragments of his self-respect from the sidewalk. All these actions were witnessed by a cold array of eyes, none lingering long enough to offer comfort. No foot advanced toward him. No voice asked if he was hurt. No one rebuked the young man who strode off, as if nothing had transpired. Hank straightened, his face flushed not only from the slap, but from the pervasive silence. In his own eyes, he was not weak, but in theirs, he might as well have been an anonymous old man, unworthy of defense, too insignificant for respect. He turned and walked on, not rushed, but resolved. He spoke no word, for too many words lay unsaid, and no one remained to hear them. And as always, he chose silence, not from resignation, but from a knowing that some things cannot be voiced, and that some pains only those who have lived long enough learn to bear by rising and moving forward as though they had never stumbled. Hank trudged to the weathered bench by the bus stop. No eyes followed him, no voices called out. He never expected any, yet the emptiness in his chest grew with each step, widening the gulf between himself and the world. He eased himself down, slowly, as though his weary bones needed time to accept the truth. that no one stood by him. His lips still stung with blood, but Hank did not wipe them. He had seen far worse wounds. What hurt him was not the slap, but the silence, the turning away, the indifference. It felt as though his dignity had been stripped away, yet no one deemed it wrong. He did not cry, but his eyes glistened with red, not from pain, but from shame. A soldier's shame, understood only by those who have once stood for honor. Hank had faced enemies on distant battlefields, but never felt so small in his own hometown. He opened his coat and drew out his old flip phone, its faded case cracked at the corners, its small screen blinking weakly. One button bore a band-taped label, Red Dog. His son's unit nickname, never uttered since the boy left the service to work in strategy. To Hank, it was more than a name. It was the last emblem tethering him to the sacred ideal of loyalty. Without hesitation, he pressed it. The click echoed in his pocket. No melody, no greeting, just the signal sent. He snapped the phone shut and tucked it away, as though it were something he was born to do. He expected no miracle, no cavalry's arrival, only an alert to someone who understood him deeply that if Hank called, he could no longer stand alone. He sat motionless, hands resting atop his cane, back leaning slightly, gaze fixed on an unseen horizon, waiting for an invisible bus, not to ride away but to prove his worth. Passers-by paid him no mind. A few glanced briefly, then turned away as though he were part of the cityscape, like a lamppost or an old sign, present but unnoticed. Time crawled, 5 minutes, 10, 20. Nothing changed. Yet Hank did not budge. Each breath controlled, each blink measured, less for rest than to keep emotions from spilling past his tolerance. His silence was not retreat. It was his final stand, his last shield against total collapse. 30 minutes passed. No one asked if he needed help. No one offered a tissue. No stranger halted. Yet Hank remained resolute. He had spent a lifetime waiting with discipline. In the service, nothing came swiftly, not even aid. But when help arrived, it came right on time. And then, just after the 31st minute, a subtle tremor beneath his feet. A vibration so faint that only Hank, having spent half his life feeling the hum of military transport, would recognize it. It was not a bus. He did not turn. He only gripped his cane more firmly, steadying himself with the certainty that yes, he had sent the call. And yes, someone was answering. No smile, no visible relief, only a profound calm, like an old soldier confirming his position on a map, knowing his comrades were en route. He remained seated, unchanged in posture, but his eyes were different, no longer red, but deeper, steadier, resolved. He did not await rescue. He awaited confirmation that he was not alone. And for a man who once stood within war's fury, the one thing he needed to keep living was not pity, but a silent affirmation that he still mattered in this world. The tremor continued, growing stronger. And somewhere beyond, people began to sense something approaching. But for Hank, it had already arrived, here, in his heart, in his memories, and in the absolute serenity of a man no longer afraid of being forgotten. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or sip some water, then stay tuned for the story's next unexpected turn. And please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see friends from around the world joining us. Comment 1 If this story moved you, so we can keep bringing you more inspiring tales. A sand-colored Humvee led the procession. Behind it, 2 military pickups, flanked by a pair of unmarked SUVs. The convoy was modest, unostentatious, yet each tire pressed the pavement with an unspoken message. We have come to restore what was broken. The Marines disembarked in unison, so synchronized no command was needed, each man knowing his position and purpose. No rifle was drawn, no warning was issued. But the air shifted from indifference to silence. At the forefront strode a man in simple uniform, no mirrored shades, no sidearm. His weathered face, keen eyes, and measured stride spoke of one accustomed to calm amid crisis. This was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus McCoy, Hank's only son. He needed no introduction, no confirmation of their bond. His presence alone bridged 2 generations, the protector and the one now returning the favor. Marcus walked straight to the bench. No hesitation, no glance sideways. He knelt beside his father, silent, respectful, without flourish. No flowery speech, no rebuke, only presence in its fullest form. "Are you all right, sir?" His voice was low, meant only for them. No cursory courtesy, but assurance. You remain who you are, as steadfast as ever. Hank nodded. No words, but his softened gaze spoke volumes. Pride, relief, and unspoken gratitude. Marcus did not linger for a reply. He rose and turned to face the street, where his father had been humiliated, ignored. Behind him, the Marines spread out. No rigid formation, yet each man claimed a stake in the block, as if sealing the street with solemn resolve. None moved hastily. None dared remain casual. An invisible circle closed in, not to isolate, but to declare, "We are here. We see you." Marcus surveyed those present. No anger, no harsh tone. Yet his stare prompted many to look away. A few patrons in the bar lowered their heads. Others set down their drinks. The atmosphere shifted, as though someone had yanked open a shutter to collective shame. No one knew what Marcus would say. But one thing was clear. Indifference was no longer an option. Hank was no longer the invisible old man by the roadside. He was a father, a Marine, and the reason a special unit had surged into downtown to restore what had been stolen, his dignity. No order was voiced, yet the Marines' positions, their stillness, their unwavering gaze spoke a single language, one that no onlooker could pretend not to understand. Hank remained seated, motionless. But he was no longer alone. Each Marine behind Marcus was part of him, not just by blood, but by shared ideals. Their presence was not to shield him from humiliation, but to affirm that what he represented still held value. And in that silence, the entire block stilled, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, the realization that accountability could not be deferred. Before any action, everyone needed to witness, face to face, what they had ignored when it first happened. This was no longer about a slap, no longer about a sandwich dropped in oil. This was about a man whom the world had overlooked, now restored to his rightful place, not by force, but by the respect shown through presence. Hank glanced at his son. No smile was needed. Yet in his eyes, Marcus saw what he had spent his life longing for. Peace. Because not every father gets the chance to be protected by the son he once protected. And not every father allows his child to witness the proud tear hidden behind a single nod. They had arrived, in the right moment, in the right manner, and for the right man. The young biker staggered back a step, his swagger replaced by an unfamiliar unease. He said nothing. He smiled not at all. His shoulders tensed, his eyes flickering between confusion and defense. Yet facing him, Marcus offered no threat, no raised voice, no clenched fist. He simply stood, upright, his gaze fixed on the man who had struck his father, as though that look alone could hold back the anger welling within. Marcus's words were quiet, yet they echoed through the suddenly hushed street like a placid lake calmed after a storm. That man served when you didn't even know how to tie your boots. No one has the right to draw blood from my father on American soil. Nothing more was needed. The weight of history, loyalty, and restrained fury carried every syllable. With a subtle nod from Marcus, no order given, only acknowledgement, one of the Marines behind him raised his hand to a radio and issued a terse command. Minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. No siren, no urgency, just an inevitable presence of accountability. The biker offered no resistance. When the officers approached, he lowered his head and allowed his hands to be cuffed, each click of the chain ringing small yet resounding, the final punctuation to conduct that should have been stopped long ago. No cheers broke out. No applause followed. Inside the bar, the music had already fallen silent. Patrons who once turned away now found themselves unable to meet one another's eyes, not from fear, but from shame. A heavy silence enveloped the block, a silence not born of emptiness, but of recognition. Someone had done right. A wrong had been confronted, not with violence, but with an unignorable presence. Marcus did not follow the officers. He remained beside his father, silent, still, his gaze never leaving Hank, as though awaiting one last sign, not for forgiveness, nor for vindication, but simply confirmation that his father was all right. Hank did not look at his son. He remained seated, hands resting on his cane. Yet his breath deepened, his frame relaxed. A man unaccustomed to aid was learning that sometimes when someone stands up for you, it does not diminish your strength. It honors your worth. Amid that charged space, an elderly woman stepped forward, her hands trembling, her eyes uncertain. She paused before Hank and offered him a clean handkerchief. No words, only a small, quiet gesture. Hank looked up, accepted it, and gave a brief nod. Within that nod lay the calming of the storm's final waves. Simple, complete acknowledgement. I see you, and thank you. Nearby, a 10-year-old boy, long hidden behind his mother's skirt, straightened to salute Hank clumsily. Wrist bent, not quite textbook, but so genuine it tugged at every heart. This single gesture ignited a ripple of solidarity. A few men emerged from the bar. One removed his hat. Another stood at attention, hand over heart. No one spoke. No one explained. Yet all understood. They rose not to play hero, but because they realized they had been silent too long. Marcus still said nothing. He stepped half a pace back, standing behind his father, not to shield him, but to underscore one truth. The man on that bench was the center. He bore a story that the whole town needed to hear, and Marcus was merely one chapter in that tale. For the remainder of those moments, no one departed. No music resumed. No one shattered the solemnity draping the pavement. And when the police car drove away, carrying the young biker along, the only image left was of father and son standing side by side. No grand gestures, but a silent testament powerful enough to still an entire town and demand that it listen. A week has passed since that day. The bench where Hank once sat, silent, solitary, now bears a new brass plaque, fastened firmly to its backrest. The inscription is brief yet weighty. In honor of Sergeant Harold McCoy, the silent pillar of perseverance. It's not gaudy, it doesn't shout, yet anyone who passes by can't help but pause for at least a moment. And Hank still comes, every Saturday afternoon. His steps are slower now, his hickory cane tapping each stride. His eyes are still accustomed to indifference. But something has changed. Not him, but the way people see him. The boy who awkwardly saluted him that day now returns each week. In his hand, a small folded flag, guided by Hank's careful instructions. The boy says little, but his eyes shine bright whenever Hank offers an approving nod. It isn't merely a lesson in ceremony. It's a lesson in how to remember someone through action. The woman who offered him a handkerchief that day now often sits beside him, not out of obligation, but because she needs a place of quiet. And there is something in Hank's gaze that makes one unafraid of silence. They do not speak much, but every word she utters is met with a nod or a faint smile from him. And once, he surprised her by asking, "How are you this week?" A question so unexpected that it brought her to tears. For a man the town once spurned was now the first to care for her. Dylan, the name once lost to shame, also appears, not at the bar, but at the Veterans Center a few blocks away. No one asked him to. There was no court order, no probation, no community service. Yet, he shows up daily, sweeping floors, brewing coffee, guiding confused elders across the street. When asked why, he simply replies, "I'm learning to see again." Not to see others, but to see himself, truly, for the first time. People no longer gossip about that old incident, but everyone remembers, not because of viral videos, nor the Marines in the street, but because of what happened afterward, in the silence. Each person began to reconsider the way they hurried past someone without a glance. In the small park beside the bar, a mural has been painted. Its colors are muted, its image simple. A silhouette of an old man standing tall, cane in hand, head tilted as if listening. No name, no banner. Yet everyone knows who it is, and why he deserves to be remembered. Some leave flowers at its base. Others tape short notes along the edges. "Thank you for teaching us how to see." Another reads, "I once passed my own father by just as quickly. Now I do not walk on." The wall does not recount the past. Instead, it keeps the present clear. Now, whenever Hank sits upon that familiar bench, people do not look away. Some stop to greet him. Some tip their hats. Others place a hand over their hearts. He responds with little more than a nod, a familiar gesture but now suffused with acknowledgement. "I see you. I know that my solitude once mattered." No one calls him a hero. He doesn't require it. All his life, he only needed to be seen. And now, no one refers to him as that odd old man on the bench. He is the one who preserves something simple yet essential for the town. A reminder that every person deserves notice, deserves to be remembered, and deserves to stand tall as he has. No one is invisible if we remember how to look at each other. That is not just the message etched on a plaque or painted on a wall. It is what Hank has proven through his presence, each Saturday afternoon, in silence, yet more eloquently than any grand gesture. Beneath the mural, where Hank's silhouette stands silent, a living memory, people see more than him. They see themselves. Every act of kindness, every moment we pause to acknowledge another as though they matter, is how we preserve the best of our society. Hank's story is not just about a slap. It reminds us that respect isn't earned by medals, but by how we treat one another, especially those most easily forgotten. Have you ever passed by a Hank in your life? If so, stop. Look. Offer a smile. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with your loved ones, friends, especially those living in the US. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you, because each time you retell a story like this, you give another silent person the chance to step into the light.